Pinnacle Airlines Flight 4712, a Bombardier CRJ-200 operating a routine flight from St. Paul, Minnesota to the Cherry Capital Airport in Traverse City, Michigan. As the flight approached Cherry Capital Airport, the weather changed for the worse. It had begun to snow quite heavily and the snow began to accumulate. Flight 4712 touched down at the Cherry Capital Airport at approximately 12:43 a.m. The pilots desperately tried to stop the plane, but despite their greatest efforts, it was no use. The plane skidded off the end of the runway before coming to a complete stop. The plane was damaged, but not one of the 49 people on board were injured. Given this information, one would assume that this is a cut and dry case of pilot error, when in fact, there is much more to this accident than meets the eye. In 1990, a man by the name of James Reason published an accident causation model that would help express the contributing factors of an accident. The model, commonly known as the Swiss cheese model, uses slices of Swiss cheese to depict different stages of an accident. The holes in the layers of Swiss cheese symbolize failures in certain levels of the accident. The holes allow failures to pass through to the next level. If the defenses are adequate on the next level, the failure is stopped. However, if the defenses are inadequate, another hole exists and the failure passes through to yet another level. If the holes in all the layers line up, this leads to an accident. This model forced investigators to take a closer look at latent failures. As their name suggests, latent failures, unlike active failures, may lie dormant or undetected for hours, days, weeks, or even longer, until one day they adversely affect the unsuspecting aircrew, and as a result of their dormancy, these failures may be overlooked by investigators with even the best intentions. We will now apply the reasons model to Flight 4712 to get a bigger picture of the factors of this accident.
There were a number of latent factors involved in this accident, ranging from management all the way to airport procedures. Typically, prior to our accident, the Cherry Capital Airport was not required to close the runway when they received a nil braking action report. Also, they were not required to perform braking action tests after plowing. Crews, typically with training, usually rely on air traffic control for their weather updates en route. This would prove to be a contributing factor later on in the accident. Also, the Systems Operation Control Duty Manager received numerous reports from the dispatcher of the Flight 4712 about concerns for the weather of the flight. He had a strong push for getting that flight out and dispatched.
There were several additional latent failures that attributed to this accident. The weather at Traverse City changed multiple times from the original dispatched weather. When 4712 landed, it was snowing fairly hard. It was the fifth leg of a 5-leg day, and the crew was fatigued. Pressures mounted as the dispatch was late and the FMS had to be updated prior to departure. The captain was also performing check airman duties for the first officer's initial operating experience flights.
The third layer of the reasons model is active failures. A number of people contributed to the list. The first would be the captain, omitting the landing distance assessment required by company policy. Another would be improper phraseology used by ground personnel when communicating with the crew of 4712. The crew accepted the insufficient or incomplete information as enough to perform a safe landing. The pilots also failed to attentively monitor the ATIS, which updated just prior to their arrival.
Defense inactive at the time of the accident was when the Flight 4712 crashed. The control tower was unmanned at the hour. If the control tower had been manned at the time of the accident, updated or current weather information could have been given to the pilots, possibly preventing the accident altogether.
Unluckily for 4712, the holes in the defenses lined up and the accident occurred. The plane ran off the edge of the runway and the aircraft was damaged. But using the data from this accident, investigators were able to provide recommendations to prevent an accident of this nature from ever occurring in the future. A drug test was performed immediately after the accident, but Pinnacle Airlines did not test for alcohol. There was no reason to assume alcohol played a role in this accident, but as a result from the pilots not being tested for it, there is no proof alcohol did not play a role. The National Transportation Safety Board, or more commonly known as the NTSB, stressed the importance of immediate drug and alcohol testing as a result of this accident. The NTSB also stressed the importance of conducting a landing distance assessment check before landing on any contaminated runway. The NTSB also issued an alert to all 14 Code of Federal Regulations Part 139 certificated airport that describe the circumstances of this accident and emphasizes the importance of specific and decisive radio communications, and urged airports to ensure that those criteria were being met in all airfield radio communications. The NTSB also required all 14 Code of Federal Regulations Part 139 certificated airport operators to include in their airport snow and ice control plan absolute criteria for type and depth of contamination and runway friction assessments that, when met, would trigger an immediate closure of the affected runway to air carrier operations, and that friction assessments should be based on pilot braking action reports, values obtained from ground friction measuring equipment, or by estimates provided by airport ground personnel. Yes, Pinnacle Airlines Flight 4712 was an unfortunate accident, but there was a lot that could be learned from it. Using the reasons model, some of the latent failures were discovered and addressed. Recommendations were then set in place to address these issues and to hopefully prevent an accident of this nature from ever occurring in the future.